What's going on, YouTube? It's the Old Soldier coming at you today from Robeson County, North Carolina, just outside the little old town of Parkton. If you blink your eye, you miss it. And when you go through, wave at Arnie and Andy and say hey. Been outside, folks. And got my 2 miles in the old Rebel Dog with the body armor, and then also had to go out and finish up some yard work, some weed eating, that kind of thing. I didn't get finished over the weekend, but this is what I wear when I walk the dog. It's just some old Kevlar IBA. I'm thinking about ordering some ballistic plates for it here soon, just to step up the ante. But that's right, airborne. Anyway, folks. Talk to you today about some things that happened yesterday on Father's Day of all days, up in the great old capital of Raleigh, with the weak dipshit mayor and the weak ass governor we got by the name of Roy Boy Cooper. You know, they decided to wait till Father's Day to go and take down Confederate monuments in the Capitol. Now, I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up the Confederacy's rear and say it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. At the same token, there were honorable men that fought on both sides of that conflict. Many will argue that slavery was the issue of the Civil War. I would argue that it was states' rights, with slavery being the biggest issue of states' rights at the time. Just so people know, and this is factual, when Robert E. Lee was offered command of the entire Army of the Confederacy, or what they called the Army of Northern Virginia, by Jefferson Davis, he told the President of the Confederate States of America, "Sir, you need to free the slaves." But he had too many lackeys in his cabinet that thought otherwise. So even Robert E. Lee knew that men should be free. I was reminded by a viewer, and it's a very valid point, Grant stated had he been fighting for the freedom of the slaves, he probably wouldn't have fought at all. And again, that's neither here nor there. My thing is, those monuments were put up through some type of act of legislation, I'm sure. Where was the act of legislation where it was voted on by the majority of the people to have it removed? I don't think there was one. It was an arbitrary move to have them taken down. And to do it on Father's Day of all days is cowardly. Cowardly. If you're taking them down to protect them for fear of being torn down, fine. But to do it on Father's Day, cowardly. But the real reason they're taking it down, because apparently Confederate statues offend people. Apparently George Washington's statue has offended people. And now statues have now all become offensive. You take Albuquerque, New Mexico. They tore the one down there. I think it was for the conquistadors. But then there was places, I think in Florida, they were tearing down statues of Christopher Columbus. One that really pisses me off is they defaced a monument to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment from the Civil War. Those dumbasses don't even realize the 54th Massachusetts was an all-colored regiment. That's what they were known as, colored. That was the term used then. Okay? And they even defaced it. Now there's talk that they're going to remove Teddy Roosevelt's statue from in front of the museum in New York City. What fresh hell is this, folks? What fresh hell is this? Because before long, they're going to start tearing down memorials and monuments to the Korean War, World War II, World War I, the Spanish-American War, on down the line. They still argue that Vietnam was contrived to kill black people off. I was reading an article on that the other day. All I know is 55,000 Americans died fighting in that war. Now, whether we should have been there or not, another conversation for another time. My point being is that they're using anything right now to deceive and divide, folks. And I'm going to read something to you out of Resistance to Tyranny. Okay? The first thing is a 5-step solution on how they're taking over. Okay? They're going to identify resistors or troublemakers. Influential and motivational persons who can serve as focal points for organization of resistance. Without that leadership, especially without widely recognized leadership, there are no centers around which resistance can coalesce. Okay? Marginalize. The next thing they're going to do is, once a group of individuals has been identified, the next stop is to marginalize them. How do they do that? Okay, print, broadcast, electronic media will proceed to present the identified group in unfavorable terms to lead the public into viewing the group as undesirable and extremist, or simply on the fringes of society. Okay, remember, the communists in the Soviet Union were never killed any people. Instead, they killed kulaks, capitalists, wreckers, saboteurs, enemies of the people, counter-revolutionaries, and similar extremists. Likewise, the Nazis claimed they never killed any Jewish people. Instead, they killed maggots, menaces to society, scum, parasites, etc. So first, by marginalizing the people they wanted to destroy, these governments were able to get away with their murders. In 1935, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister for the Nazi Party, organized spontaneous demonstration against the Jews. The purpose behind that was to make the German people think that anti-Semitism was much larger and stronger than it really was. And those Germans who were not anti-Jewish were made to feel that they were in a minority. Okay? Right now, right now, the marginalization, has happened to people that standing up for the Second Amendment rights, standing up for the Constitution. We're being marginalized. Okay? Even our own government marginalized what happened in Oklahoma City when they called it the militia movement. Okay? Even though there was no connection between the convicted bombers and any militia organization. Okay? And during the government siege of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, the Davidians were constantly referred to in the news media as a cult, living in a compound. Not as religious group living in a community. Think about that for a little bit. I had to think on that one. Once the marginalization has been successful, the public is less likely to identify with or sympathize with the target group as the government campaign is stepped up. Demonize and label is the next step. Okay, demonize and label. Once the public has in mind regulated the target group to fringe status, it's easier for the government to attack it. The public fringe status is easier. The public can be manipulated against the group, and public attitudes can be led from antipathy to open hatred. Hitler was very successful against this with the Jews, gypsies, and other marginalized groups. So in the spring and summer 1935, the spontaneous public outburst organized by his buddy Goebbels made it appear anti-Semitism was the norm in Germany. When the racist Nuremberg laws were enacted in the fall of 1935, the public was already convinced that most Germans were anti-Semitic. Those who weren't anti-Semitic felt themselves to be a small and isolated minority. Now we move into part 4, persecution. Once the target group has been pushed to the fringes of society and made out to be bad guys, violence against this group's members can be taken with impunity. Wholesale criminalization of the marginalized groups will lead to aggressive actions against them, it says here, by law enforcement personnel. Thugs and goons who attack members of these marginalized groups will not be prosecuted, and anyone who attempts to oppose these actions on civil rights grounds will be regarded as some kind of freak. Okay, let's look at what's going on in Seattle. They've taken over a 6-block area, call it CHOP, Chaz, whatever the hell you want to call it. There was an article in the news last week, or over the weekend, when they had 2 people shot, 1 died. First responders and the police showed up, but were not allowed in. Then there's a video of the so-called leader chastising the first responders for not wanting to go in. Can't blame them. I wouldn't. Okay. if you even so much as say you're a Trump supporter in and around these groups, they're coming out now and outright attacking people. Now, support who you want politically. I don't give a darn, okay? That is your business, your choice. But the moment you lay hands on me for who I decide to vote for, you have crossed a line. And likewise, if I lay hands on somebody because they want to vote for Joe Biden, I have crossed the line. I can criticize them. They can criticize me all day long. We can have an open dialogue and discourse all day long about that. But the moment we physically attack each other, we've crossed the line. But here we're seeing, take an example, Albuquerque, New Mexico. The guy was withdrawing. They continued to attack him. They came at him with a skateboard knife. He produced a handgun and he shot to defend. He shot and defended himself. Okay. Who was arrested? The man with the gun. The police would not arrest the other violent protesters. And if they have, I have not seen it. So if they have, someone let me know in the comments below. Okay. That was why I posted last week about the U.S. Concealed Carry Association, why it's important to have some level of protection. I'm not saying you got to go with U.S. Concealed Carry Association. And I think there's some other groups out there. I'm not entirely sure. But check them out. Okay? Check them out. And now it brings us to the fifth part, elimination. Last step is elimination of the target group. This need not go to such blatant extremes as the Nazis' Germans' final solution, Stalin's anti-Kulak campaigns, or starvation of the Ukrainians, or the Chinese massacre at Tiananmen Square. Mass jailings, confiscation of property, loss of jobs, and various civil penalties may suffice to break the back of the resistance. Okay, and the reason I'm bringing this up, and again, this is I've read all this out of Resistance to Tyranny. Okay, now it talks about the government, things like that, but what we're seeing too is we're seeing players from a deep state type area that I believe anyway. You know, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, funded through the Clinton Foundation via George Soros, i.e. the Democratic Party, i.e. the new Progressive Communist Party. Call it what you will, but that's where it's headed. Because I'm still reading the other book, The Naked Communist, that continues to elaborate to these things. My point being is, our enemies have gotten control of the media, and probably have for the last 30 years. Okay? But they've become more vocal, more adamant, and more forthright in producing fake news, false narrative, rewriting stories, okay, marginalizing those of us that believe in the Constitution as the law of the land, all right? Take example what happened in Atlanta. The cop shot the man, he died. Tragic, I get it. People would argue, well, that man didn't get his due process, so we'll just take due process away from the officer. Two wrongs don't make a right. The sad part was his mayor, his chief, turned their back on him and basically encouraged the DA to find anything to charge him with because of political pressure, political climate, okay, given and catered to the mob. And that's what's happened in Atlanta. That worthless ass mayor and her piece of crap DA gave in to the mob. I think part of it's because that DA is wanting to cover his tracks for crap he's got going on, because he's corrupt. And I think the mayor is trying to make a name for herself because she wants to be the Democratic nominee, vice presidential nominee. So instead of letting the State Bureau of Investigation, which was asked to do an independent investigation of the shooting, complete their investigation, they went ahead and proceeded to press charges. Got in a conversation with somebody on Facebook yesterday that was talking about those police officers in Atlanta took an oath to defend people. Yeah, they did. They also got to think about their families and their welfare. And when your mayor and your chief of police resigns, I'd still like to know more about that one. Where's the writing on the wall there? But when your mayor and the DA don't back your cops, don't even give due process a fair chance, I'd walk too. Because what police officers are paid nationally is peanuts compared to what they ought to get paid for what they got to deal with. I learned a long time ago I wasn't cut out to be a cop. I have a propensity to want to shoot first and ask questions later. I learned at a very young age in an incident when I was in the National Guard for 2 years where we were called up to aid civil authority. My first inclination at a particular incident was to pull my weapon and get ready to neutralize, instead of letting the sheriff's deputy that was with us go and handle the situation. And I'll tell you that story at another time because it's kind of funny, it's kind of not. But long story short, I knew right then and there I didn't have what it took to be a cop. Okay? They go into these situations on domestic calls, traffic calls, pull over people in traffic. And the moment they get out of the car and walk up to another vehicle, or walk up to the door, or onto a property, they don't know what they are up against. And I know many police officers, and I've talked to them. Domestic calls show up because the wife called, husband's been beaten on me, come get him. Show up, the wife jumps the cop because they're getting ready to take the husband off, because in the time they've called to the time the cops get there, you know, they've supposedly kissed and made up, but now the cop was under an obligation to take the party that was reported for the abuse off the property. And now because he's following through with those instructions, he's the one getting attacked. Okay. Or in this case where they showed up for Mr. Brooks and started to arrest him for driving under the influence. Up until that point, yes, Mr. Brooks was very cooperative. But the moment they decided to arrest him, he got violent. He didn't want to go back to jail. Sorry. You drove to that Wendy's drunk. People argue, well, he was just parked there. How did he get the car there? He gave no regard for anybody else's life when he got behind the wheel drunk. And see, I don't have any mercy for drunk drivers myself. I've had friends killed by drunk drivers. I got an uncle that was in law enforcement that was killed by a drunk driver at a weigh station. Okay? When you drink and you drive, you give no consideration to anybody else out on the road once you get behind that wheel. You have surrendered that bit of liberty, I say. Either way it goes, Mr. Brooks was determined to be drunk, and they were going to try to arrest him for drunk driving. He resisted, scuffled, took an officer's taser, turned the fire at him. The other police officer engaged, neutralized the threat. But because of the politically charged climate they're in now, every shooting goes with speculation. Every shooting now is now deemed racial if it's, a white officer on a person of color, it seems. And folks, don't take what I'm saying as I'm against people of color. God, no. I'm telling you what the news is purporting things to do and what the news is building things up to be. It's an intentional division. Because that's the other part. Remember I talked last week about the rise of communism back in the United States. That's the other part of their plan, is to divide so that they can conquer. A house divided shall fall. A house united shall stand. All right? That was one thing when I was in the Army. We were taught to get, you had to get along. You had to watch each other's back. Do I agree with all my friends that were in the Army politically? No. If anything, they probably think I'm a nut job for my beliefs. But, that's another story for another time. But at the end of the day, I could pick up the phone and call 10 or 20 of them. Hey, I'm in trouble. And they'd have my back. I'd probably get chewed out for whatever I did. And vice versa if they called me. Said, hey, old soldier, I'm down here at What's and What's bar, and these guys are about to whoop my rear end because I called them this, or I bumped into one of them and said, you just get in the corner, I'm on my way. And we'll argue amongst ourselves. But, I'm way off on a tangent now from what I started this thing with. But I wanted to bring that up about really what happened in Raleigh yesterday. But to me, it ties into everything that's going on nationwide. To me, what they did yesterday was cowardly. Cowardly and without due process of legislative action. Okay? Because if it was on state property in the Capitol, the people of North Carolina should have a right to vote on that and let the election polls determine what happens to those monuments and those statues. And also, one last thing on that. Robert E. Lee himself stated at the end of the war that we should not erect any monuments to the war. But the veterans on both sides are the ones that started doing it. Now, mind you, he was the leader of the Confederate Army for the majority of the war. Came out and even said that we should not erect any monuments. Especially, he wanted no monuments in honor of him. I'm just putting it out there, folks, because they're bashing the man, but he actually had a place in his heart for all men. All men. The only reason he sided with the Confederacy is because he had more loyalty for the state of Virginia than he did the Union when it boiled down to it. And if we could all jump in a time machine and go back in time and ask him why he did that, I'm sure we would get an explanation that makes sense. But sadly we can't. So, we can only go back to what the history books have told us. And I'd suggest stock up on some history books, folks, because that's going to be the next thing we're going to start seeing happen. They're going to start going to these libraries and pulling certain books and burning them. That harkens back to 1936 when the Nazi Party started book burning. Think about what I've said here today, folks. If you don't believe me, you can order the book, Resistance to Tyranny. Okay? Resistance to Tyranny. And I'm still working through it as well. Because I think that's where we're headed at the rate things are going. Pray for our president. I know there's some of you here that like him, some of them you don't. I'm neither hot nor cold, but he is our president. I think with what's going on in Washington, D.C., and he hasn't done anything yet, it's going to get to a breaking point. I kind of get it. He's wanting the mayor and the governor of that state and mayor of that city to do what they're supposed to do. I think they're wanting him to do something so they can use it in a political climate against him. So either way it goes, he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. If he does something, they're going to do something. If he doesn't do anything, I get it, but I wish he would do something soon. Because now, like you said, you got people in there getting shot, killed. There's reports that are people losing their property. There's reports of rape going on. You got rampant drug use going on. Okay. And what's funny is you got people in there that they say they want to live in peace with all people, but yet they're segregating themselves due to race, creed, and color. If you don't believe me, there's a photo of a garden that was planted, and it said for black people only. But I thought they were all coming together there and live in peace and harmony, kumbaya, and we all get along. Okay. So at the end of to summarize all this, folks, we just need to come together as a nation. We need to learn to love one another once again. But more importantly, these upstarts that are trying to ruin our great nation, we the silent majority, that's what I've been told it's termed, we need to start becoming a loud majority. The only thing I know to do right now is speak out on this medium here. That was smart. Drop a water bottle. Good thing it's only water. I'd have been mad if it had been coffee. But anyway, folks, it's really all the time I've got for right now. Y'all stay safe, stay vigilant, stay armed. God bless, take care. Old Soldier out.